He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me by still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Sounds pretty good to me. Let's talk about that. Hello and welcome to Fusion. I'm your host, Brendan Saunders. Fusion is where we explore the integration of faith and life. Before we get started with this episode, would you do 3 things for me? Number 1, would you subscribe to this channel? We would love to have more subscribers. We would love for you to be a part of our growing family. Number 2, would you hit the like button, the thumbs up, and like this video? And number 3, would you ring my bell? Okay, that was horrible. I shouldn't do that. But nonetheless, would you ring the bell up in the top right-hand corner? The bell is the notification button, and what that does is it allows you to know anytime I post a video. Now, you may have already figured out, or you may already know, I post 1 video a week, and I post it on Wednesday mornings, and I am so thankful that you have chosen to join me. The passage that I started this episode with comes from the 23rd Psalm. You probably have heard the 23rd Psalm before because it is one of the most read passages at funerals. The passage that you probably know the best is, let me see if this sounds familiar to you. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, right? I'm sure you've heard that a bunch of times, often in the context of a funeral. However, there's a lot going on in that passage. In fact, the whole psalm is only 6 verses, and they're very power-packed verses. And really, the whole point of them is to say that God is there with us. It is actually was written as a joyous confirmation of the fact that God is with his followers, that he doesn't leave us. The verses that I read have always stuck with me. They've always stuck with me. They're verses 2 through 3, where, as I said, it says that he makes us lie down in green pastures. He leads us by still waters. He restores our soul. He leads us in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. This is a picture of a life that is surrendered to God. This is a picture of the person who has said, God, you're the shepherd, I'm the sheep, I will follow you. I will give my life to you, and you will give the direction, you will give the care of my life. I'm trusting you. And what he in turn does is says, yes, as a good shepherd, this is what I do. I can give you green pastures, and the picture that it's giving is one of abundance. I can lead you by still waters, and again, the picture is one of calmness, one of restfulness. It's emotional, if you will. One of the things when you talk about water and the power of water as a sound, I often talk about back in the day when it was very popular to have water features in your house. And I know some people still have water features in their house. And the reason why you would have a water feature in your house, maybe a little pond or a little waterfall thing, is because that ambient sound of trickling and running water, smoothly, slowly running water, is so calming. It says he restores the soul. It's an inner work. It's something that he's doing on the inside, but it has effects on the outside, and that he leads us in the right path. You ever try to figure out which is the right way to go? Again, God as our shepherd promises that he will lead us in the right path. He will do this all for his name's sake. In other words, for his glory. And so this is what he promises to his follower. It doesn't mean perfection. It doesn't mean that your life is going to be perfect. It doesn't mean that you aren't going to face trials. I've already mentioned that within the context of this passage, he talks about being in the valley of the shadow of death. He will also later talk about sitting down at a meal in the presence of your enemies, right? And so the idea is that, listen, in the all that life gives, both the good, bad, and indifferent, and especially when it comes to the challenges and the trials, as a good shepherd, God is always there to care for his followers. He will always be there. He is always there. And so God provides this inner refreshment, this lying down in green pastures, this being by still waters, this restoration of the soul. All of these are inner refreshments that God provides for his followers. It's the emotional support, it's mental support, most of all, it's spiritual renewal and guidance. And it is a beautiful and wonderful and powerful thing for us to be reminded of. I believe I already said this, but this this passage was not written to be a funeral dirge. This passage was written to be a great statement of joy, a declaration of the greatness of God on behalf of his followers. And so that's what you have with that. But I have a little twist. And the little twist is that while I talk about this in terms of the individual and what we can experience as individuals who have placed our faith in God, my twist is, should this apply to the church as well? Let me give you a little more background on that. Years ago, I was going through a time of prayer and preparation. I was in full-time ministry as a youth pastor. I believe that God was moving me on from that position to, in fact, be the lead pastor of a church. But not just any church, a church that would be a brand new church, often called church plants in Christianity. The idea of a brand new church that starts from scratch is that it's a church plant. So the belief by my family and I was that God was leading us not merely to take on an existing church, but to start a brand new church. And so we were going through a time of almost 2 years of prayer and preparation for what this would look like, how God would fulfill this, when to go, when not to go, where not to go, all that. During that time, he kept bringing this passage back to me. I would be, sitting in front of a sermon, and they'd preach on this passage. I would, pick up, a Bible app that had the verse of the day, and this passage would come up. I just kept being inundated with this passage, and specifically those lines from verses 2 through 3 just kept sticking in my mind and in my heart. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me by still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. I knew that I was experiencing that individually, personally, at that time. I knew that my family was experiencing that at that time. We knew what it was to have God give of his abundance to us. We knew what it was to have God put a calmness on our hearts. We knew what it was to have him restoring our soul. We knew what it was to be guided by him in the right path. But here's what I wondered. Could the church that I would be embarking on, the church that I would be starting, could the church reflect this as well? In other words, it's all well and good for this to be an individual thing. It is an individual thing. But is it possible for a church body, a gathering, a group of believers who have come together, is it possible for them to experience this corporately as a body? Is it possible? Not only is it possible, but should it not be? What would it be like to have a church experience that was marked by God's abundance? What would it be like to have a church experience that brought out calmness, a sense that we can rest, What would it be like to experience a church experience that restored the soul and pointed me in the right path? What would it be like to have a church experience that was about God's namesake, not about me? Is that possible? That became the vision for the church that I planted. That, yes, we would do all the things that churches do. We would worship God, and that we would teach his word, and that we would love one another. But the overarching vision of the atmosphere and the place that we wanted to have God create in our midst was this type of place. And so we went about it. I don't know, I'll be honest. I don't know to what degree we achieved it, but I know it was always the vision. So much so that the church that I pastored, the tagline for our church was a safe place to belong. A safe place to belong. When I look at a place where you lie down in green pastures, where you're led by still waters, where your soul is restored, where you're pointed in righteousness, where it's all about God's glory, that seemed to me like a safe place to belong. And I understand, again, just like in our individual lives, I understand that in the life of a church, there is not perfection. There is never going to be perfection. You have a group of imperfect individuals trying to do life together. So please understand, this was not about simply our worship services. This was about how we as a church function beyond Sunday morning, how we dealt with one another, how we served and loved one another. And there was an understanding that because we are sinful people, that, hey, there's still going to be times when we as a church body, when we face trials, when we face difficulties, when we face issues. And that's all okay. Because, again, the context of this passage is in the valley of the shadow of death. The context of this passage is in the presence of mine enemies. So as I have always said about the church, wolves are always going to be among the sheep. But that doesn't mean that God isn't able to perfectly put together and lead believers who are sold out. I think one of the keys is for his glory. This is all for his name's sake, it says in the passage. That's his glory. Right? When church is about us, when it's about our personal wants, our personal desires, our personal preferences, that's when we lose sight. But when church is about God's glory, and each of us is individually surrendered to God as our shepherd, then I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to say that our church experience ought to be reflected in this. How about you? What do you think? Does your walk with God resemble this in any way? Do you see that amidst the trials and the situations that you face in life, both good, bad, and indifferent, are you able to say that as I follow God and as I have made him the shepherd of my life, that I know what it is to experience his abundance, that I know what it is to have a calmness in the midst of storms, that I know what it is to have my inner soul restored, even though physically I'm getting older, and maybe that's just for me because as I get older, I see the physical things breaking down, but nonetheless, I know what it is to have God lead me down the right path. Is that what you experience with God? I'd love to hear in the comments. I'd love to hear this. But then, as I said, how about as churches? Is this a reasonable vision for a church to be living this out and experiencing this as a communal body beyond Sunday service, in all the activities that we do, in all the ways that we interact with, minister, and fellowship with one another? Is it possible? By the way, I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear in the comments if you think this is possible. If you were one who went to my church, I would love to hear in the comments how you think that we did. Was our church a safe place to belong? Did our church reflect these these ideas, these values, and this ministry and work of God? I would love to hear that in the comments as well. What are ways? Please hit me up in the comments. What are ways that churches can actually fulfill this? I look forward to hearing from you on that. And as I said, to this day, even as to this day, when I look at churches and I assess churches, there's all sorts of ways to look and assess, and Acts gives us all sorts of stuff about what the early church looked like and all that. But I always do look and see and wonder and try to assess overall, what is the vibe, if you will, of this church? And overall, is there anything reflective of what Psalms talks about? If God is the shepherd of this church flock, then shouldn't I be seeing some of these things growing and being seen and experienced in this flock? And so I look for that. I don't know what you look for. Again, I'd love to hear in the comments what you look for in churches, and I do look forward to speaking with you again next week. So thank you for hanging out with me. We'll talk again in a week.